Welcome to the Deep Dive. You know, sometimes the most fascinating science is hidden in plain sight, like watching an apple turn into, well, eventually vinegar. It's quite a transformation. And today, we've got a really unique deep dive for you. We're following an ongoing school project by two students, Kesser and Steen. They're documenting their journey making cider, which is ultimately destined to become vinegar for their Tante Grun. But let's be clear from the start. This isn't some polished how-to video. It's messy, it's real-time, it's full of those, actual practical lessons and observations you only get when you're doing it yourself. So if you follow fermentation or you're just curious, this is definitely for you.
Absolutely. And what's so great about looking at it through their eyes, their sort of youthful experimental approach, is that we get a fresh look at the basic principles of fermenting fruit. It connects the science bit with really direct observation, something that often gets smoothed over in textbooks.
Yeah, it puts the discovery back into it, doesn't it?
It really does.
So our mission today is basically to pull out the key insights from their specific journey. Those little nuggets that can maybe give you a shortcut to understanding this whole complex fermentation world. We'll look at how they document things, the bumps in the road they hit, and what it all means for how you might learn something new yourself. Okay, let's unpack this. So Kesser and Steen, they've set up their project almost like chapters, or like a visual diary, which is pretty engaging. But the source material we looked at is very clear. Don't mistake this for a step-by-step guide. The really valuable stuff, the actual learning process, is often in the notes, the text that goes with the visuals.
Exactly. You really need to read those notes.
Yeah, essential reading if you want the full picture.
Right. Because their method, it's more about encouraging you to think for yourself rather than just follow steps 1, 2, 3. They're kind of painting a picture of the important bits they notice, especially since, well, this is their first time fermenting apple must. It makes it more lively.
And it helps that they have this background, right? Helping in Oma's garden or at Tante Grun's place where the apples actually come from.
Mm-hmm.
So from their perspective, there isn't a huge difference between, say, feeding chickens and running what they call their small yeast factory.
That's a great way to put it.
It connects nature and innovation really neatly.
And that perspective is key. Because when they're just looking for bubbles, which seems so simple, they're actually seeing the core of fermentation, energy conversion. They're watching yeast produce ATP, its energy source, by breaking down sugar. They might not use those terms, but that's what's happening.
It cuts right to the chase, biochemically speaking.
Precisely.
And what's really interesting, especially since they're, 11, they have access to a specific yeast culture.
Yeah, not just any yeast.
No, this one was apparently propagated, a term from brewing by someone called Den Gamel Brigger Jacobson.
So a carefully selected strain.
Right. They're starting with pretty good ingredients, biologically speaking. But for them, the simple check is, are there bubbles?
And that's perfectly valid. That observation is fundamental. Those bubbles mean CO2 production.
It means alcohol fermentation is happening.
Exactly. It's a macro sign of microactivity. You don't always need fancy weir. Sometimes just looking closely tells you a lot.
Okay, so moving on to the setup. There's that crucial first step, mixing the starter culture, the yeast, with the must, the juice. They sort of show this implicitly.
Yeah, getting that initial mix right is key for an even start.
Sounds basic, but foundational.
Totally. And then, practically speaking, when filling the containers, they go nearly full, just a little headspace for foam.
Yeah.
And they add a few drops of cooking oil. Now, why do that?
Ah, the oxygen thing.
Precisely. During this active phase, you explicitly do not want oxygen getting in. O2 can lead to, well, vinegar too soon or other off flavors. The oil acts as a barrier.
But counterintuitively, you mentioned that a little bit of space at the very start for the first couple of days can be useful.
It can be practical, yeah. It lets them splash it around a bit, make sure the yeast gets distributed everywhere before things really seal up and go anaerobic, a little initial boost.
Got it. And what about leftover must, if they have extra juice?
Well, they mention a few options, using different sized containers, which makes sense, or short-term storage in the fridge.
Like for a couple of days.
Yeah, or freezing it, that could be for longer storage, or even used later to help regulate temperature if needed. It's about resource management.
That actually reminds me of something else they noted earlier. Large fermentation tanks can generate their own heat.
Right. Self-heating. That's a fascinating aspect of scale.
Yeah. Kesser and Steen's little containers probably won't do that, but knowing that a big tank could get hot enough to stress the yeast, that's a valuable lesson if you ever scale up.
Definitely. It highlights different dynamics at different volumes.
Speaking of yeast stress, let's talk about feeding them. Like plants, they need more than just, sugar water.
Absolutely. Apples and grapes have glucose and fructose, the main fuel, but yeast needs, as the source puts it, many other
Like
things.
what sorts of things?
Micronutrients, minerals, vitamins, these are crucial cofactors for the enzymes that do the actual work of converting sugar to alcohol.
So without them, the yeast might get sluggish or stall.
Exactly. Stressed yeast can produce off flavors or just give up, which leads back to that advice. Aim for rich fruit of the right quality from healthy plants.
It all connects back to the orchard, doesn't it? Even what you spray out in your plantation.
Which brings us neatly to sulfur. This is a really important point.
Okay.
Spraying elemental sulfur, say on grapes against mildew or apples against scab, especially close to harvest, can really inhibit the yeast.
So it slows things down.
It can, significantly. Now, industrial yeast strains might be bred to tolerate more sulfur, but wild yeasts, much more sensitive. Kesser and Steen might encounter those.
It's funny how oxidation keeps popping up. We talked about sugar combustion earlier, and now sulfur. It's all basic chemistry, isn't it? Sulfur, S on the periodic table.
It is, and you encounter sulfur in different forms, too. Elemental S on the fruit, like we said, or burning sulfur in oak barrels for sanitation.
Right, I've heard of that.
Or later, as sulfites, added as a salt to stop fermentation in wine and help preserve it. Understanding these different roles is really key.
Okay, let's tackle the fear. That moment when the bubbles stop. Maybe after a few days, maybe a week or two, maybe even 3 if it's cool. And you think, oh no, what did I do wrong?
Happens to everyone. It's a natural reaction when the activity seems to just cease.
And in Denmark, they even have special rooms for this stuff, right? A brigger's.
Traditionally, yes. A utility room, often used for brewing or laundry, now sometimes called a technic room, a tech room. It shows how embedded these processes can be in home life.
But the reassurance here, and Kesser and Steen are learning this firsthand, is nature has it completely under control. It's not about you being perfect.
No, perfection isn't the goal. Observation and adaptation are.
Which raises the question, how do we learn if we don't observe and, crucially, document?
Exactly. That's why keeping a logbook is so important. Write down what you do when you do it, temperatures, additions, what you see.
Even if it feels like it went wrong.
Especially if it went wrong. That's how you learn. How else do you figure out cause and effect for next time? It's fundamental scientific practice, really.
Okay, quick question, slightly off topic, but relevant if you're fermenting inside, like maybe Kesser and Steen are. Carbon dioxide, lighter or heavier than air?
Ah, good one. It's definitely heavier. CO2 has a molar mass of about 44 grams per mole, while air, mostly nitrogen 28 and oxygen 32, averages around 29.
So it sinks.
It sinks. And that's where the danger lies. It can form this invisible layer near the floor, pushing out the oxygen.
I'm reading a story about a home brewer.
Yes, it's a real risk. Poor ventilation in a basement or confined space, you could genuinely run into trouble, even risk suffocation, as the source material points out. It's silent.
Needs respect.
Absolutely. But then here's the irony.
The practical side.
Yeah. That same heavy CO2 layer actually protects the fermenting liquid in the container. It forms a natural barrier against oxygen, which, as we said, you don't want getting in once fermentation's going strong.
Huh. So it's dangerous but also useful.
Exactly. So the message is, understand the risks, ventilate properly, but don't panic unnecessarily. Look at it practically.
Limit the hysteria. Use the physics.
Well put. And the source is right to include a clear disclaimer. CO2 is produced, it can be toxic, manage it safely. Ventilation is key.
Okay, shifting gears. How do they track progress? Density comes up. Mass is filed.
Right. Density is basically just a measure of how much sugar is left in the liquid. More sugar means higher density. As yeast converts sugar to alcohol, which is less dense than water, the density drops.
So brewers use that floating thingy.
A hydrometer, yeah. Fliedvex. Winemakers might use an optical refractometer by measuring the density at the start and comparing it to the end reading.
When it's near 0 Brix or 1.000 specific gravity.
Right, indicating most sugar is gone. You can calculate the approximate alcohol percentage. It tells you how well the yeast did its job.
And the advice is to test multiple times, not just start and end.
Definitely. Plotting those readings, date, time, temperature on a curve in your logbook gives you a much richer picture. You see the rate of fermentation, how it slows down, how temperature affects it. Much more insightful.
Makes sense. What about pH?
pH is another big one. It affects the brew's overall robustness, its taste, and how well it will keep. For wine, getting the pH right is crucial for stability and aging.
And for Kesser and Steen, aiming for vinegar.
Well, it's interesting. The source notes, Riley, that Vinegar that shouldn't be sour doesn't really make sense. So while pH matters for the initial cider, the eventual high acidity is actually the goal. It shows how pH defines the final character.
Right, so after this primary fermentation, what's next? For wine, you mentioned sulfuring.
Often, yes, adding sulfites can halt the yeast activity when the winemaker likes the taste, maybe preserving some sweetness, and it helps prevent spoilage and oxidation.
But leaving sugar behind, that residual sweetness, can be risky, right?
Very risky if not managed properly. Leftover sugar is food for bacteria or other unwanted microbes. That's how you can end up with something undrinkable, what
Yeah.
the source calls painter's cleaner.
Yikes. A good warning about stabilization.
Definitely. And it loops back to Kesser and Steen. They're currently just at one stage making the cider. The vinegar step is still to come.
Their journey isn't over.
Not at all. It really shows fermentation is often a process with multiple stages, each needing care.
So wrapping this up, what are the big takeaways from following Kesser and Steen's project so far? We've seen this great mix of scientific principles and just really practical observation. The absolute need for logging everything, even the stuff that goes sideways, because that's where the learning is, and exploring these elements like CO2 and sulfur, how they can be both hazards and tools.
That's right. Their project is a fantastic illustration of how complex and interconnected nature is. And understanding it takes curiosity, sure, but also diligence, careful watching, and being willing to learn constantly.
It really embodies that nature and innovation class title they have.
It truly does. It's a continuous discovery process.
So it leaves me thinking, and maybe you listening too, what hidden processes are going on in your life? Maybe in the kitchen, maybe elsewhere. Could they benefit from a bit more curiosity? Maybe even a logbook, understanding the risks and the benefits.
It's a great thought. I'd encourage you to take these ideas, observing, documenting, thinking critically, and maybe apply them somewhere new. These aren't just fermentation skills. They apply everywhere.
Well said. And for Kesser and Steen, their cider to vinegar journey continues. Keep an eye out for updates if you're following their project. Definitely check out that cider making playlist, and crucially, read the notes under their videos for the full story as it unfolds. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. Welcome to The Deep Dive. You know, sometimes the most fascinating science is hidden in plain sight,